Welcome to the Reinforced Running Podcast. My name is Rich Ryan. I will be your host. Today, we have my homie, Kirk DeWindt. Kirk is a full-time coach, a Spartan Pro athlete, and the co-host of The Running Public. And he's kind of developed this system of training that has allowed him to expand his volume that he's able to put in day to day without running a ton in terms of frequency. So I've kind of adopted something similar to this as I've come back from an injury, and it was really interesting to talk to Kirk and talk about how he's been able to refine this and still get really, really good results, because I'm hoping for the same type of results, and I hope you guys can get similar results with this information. So I love this conversation. Honestly, it was really cool. A lot of candid stuff that went on throughout. We talked about, coming back from injury and how to do this balancing act between frequency of running and total volume so you just continue to get better. We talk about the aging process and how we plan to continue to improve, and the things that we're going to do and the steps we're going to take to make sure that happens as we continue to grow as endurance athletes. And then we have a really cool conversation about just the Running Public podcast. So stick around to the end to catch all that. Again, I love this conversation. Love Kirk. He's my guy. So I hope you enjoy.
Well, I'll tell you my story first, because I don't know if I've explained it fully, but so this is what happens to me, and I feel like I've been sort of the king of cross training for just ever, and it's by default, but now I've embraced it in like the last year, right? So I was off for 5 months with a stress fracture in my cuboid in my foot. It's like a slow healing bone. I did too much cross training on it on the bike actually, and delayed recovery is what I believe happened. It should have healed itself in 2 to 3 months. Ended up 5 because I just believe I was putting a little much on it. But what happens to me is every time I take a large chunk of time off and then I return to running, it's my tibia, my shin. And I develop really bad shin splints, and my body needs like an adaptation period of like 6 months to a year before my shins can handle the volume of the rest of my body. But that only happens after I take a big reset from injury. So I started running again, babying the foot, and then the foot starts to feel better, but the shins start to act up. And they're like a slow coddling process for me. So that's the cycle I've been in after every injury, is my injury ends up feeling better, but my shins always end up rearing their head. And then that's what I manage until they slowly get better, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And is this something that you're now expecting to have happen? Like, it's just happened so often that, and where is it? Is it like on the front of your shins or like
medial,
inside
ridge every time in about a 4-inch section? I've had my first stress fracture when I was 17 in my tibia. I probably had 6 since. Yeah, it's just, that's actually the thing that I manage more than anything is like shin splints or stress reactions on the inside medial part of my tibia. So my foot stress fracture that I talked about on our podcast ad nauseum is not an issue right now. There's no pain in my foot. It's managing the shin and lower leg issue. And so because every time I've come back from injury, I've then had to coddle the shin along, I've just developed a way to like still be really effective at running when I can run, and then fill in the gaps with cross training when needed. And so it's just been like trial by fire too many times where now I feel like I know what I'm doing in that department. So that's how I feel like we're even having this conversation.
And I feel like there is a place for this, not just for an athlete like yourself or like myself who's coming back from injury and just wants to, and is used to doing volume and knows that there needs to be a certain amount of work that needs to be done to be effective as a competitor. But like, I think like athletes who are coming into the sport of obstacle racing who might not have that decade of endurance training, that they need to expand their volume one way or another.
Yep.
And this could be a good avenue for that. From a practical application point, like, what are you doing? And like, how much volume in like the total scheme of things, and like, how is that kind of broken out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's like 2 phases to this, right? The phase 1 is this, like when you're super injured and you actually can't run. Like when you were in the non-running phase, I don't know how long you were in that for. How long
like
were you
8 weeks? It was about 8 weeks.
Which seems like an eternity when you're used to running 6 days a week. So there's phase 1, which is if you're like literally can't run at all but want to keep your volume up. You keep the exact same structure to your week, which means for me it was quality Tuesday and long effort mixed with quality on Saturday, and then mostly recovery efforts in between, but still like swinging the hammer hard on the same days that I would have swung the hammer hard when I was running. So it's like a lack of focus. Like if you're injured, you're going to get out of shape just because you can't focus. And then phase 2 is typically reintroduce running on recovery days and still keeping the cross training on the hard days. So now I'm actually running for recovery, but cross training when on the hard days. And then that shifts. Then that shifts to running on the hard days and cross training on the recovery days once you have the habit and the acclimation of the weight bearing principle of running back. So it's like a 3-phase sort of thing. But if you do it right, you can get back to really good performances, like I feel like relatively quickly, because you're working the right systems. Then you re-engage the running biomechanics, get back to used to impact, and then you flip the turn, and then all you do is you run what's important and you do the big work that needs to happen, and then you fill it with cross-training in between. So all the big work is getting done. Even maybe bigger work now is getting done than when I'm running 5 or 6 days a week. Because when I run, I hit it. And then when I recover and completely deload. So like right now, I'm only running 3 days a week, and I have been, I think I hit 4 days a week one time, and I was super pumped about that, but then realized it was too much. So it was just so sad, right? But
sometimes I will kind of dwell on what I could have done potentially in the past. Like if I had started doing this like 10 years ago, or training this way, or having this specific mindset, like where would that kind of lead me to now? But I try to kind of stay in this moment, just so I don't kind of pummel myself with those thoughts of what could my potential ceiling be. But who knows where the story's going to end. So do you think about this much? Do you think about like where your story is and how it's going to kind of play out?
Oh yeah. For sure. Here's the thing. You and I are luckier than most people, Rich. And we're luckier than most people because we've been putting money in our running bank for years. So when something pops up for guys like you and me, and I'll be the first to admit it, I'm not a cyborg. I've just been depositing in my running bank account for decades, right? So an injury pops up, but your body remembers, right? You've worked hard to develop those capillary beds and all that mitochondria and red blood cell transport and stroke volume of your heart. You've earned all that, right? So you come back and you start running a little bit again, and people are like, Kirk's a freak. Look at, he's running 3 days a week. And yes, I think I got something figured out here. But at the same time, I'm cashing out money that I've put in for years, and you're kind of in the same boat. So when I say that, I'm prefacing the sense that I believe I can be good in this sport for a long time because of the work I've put in already for decades, right? So if injury pops up as we get older, and I've had more of these as I've gotten older, I still believe I can find a way to do it because I've earned the right to do so by all the years of training I've put in my running piggy bank, right? So for in that sense, you talk about your story. My story is no matter what happens, whether I stay injury free for the next 5 years of my life or I have to deal with what I'm dealing with. I know the story's going to end. It's going to end as well as I want it to because I'm not going to take my foot off the flame, right? So I don't worry about it, and I don't even worry about that whole time. Father Time always wins. He does. But Father Time usually wins, right? Because people get injured and they keep their foot off the flame. Father Time wins what? So I can't run as fast of a 5K as I could in college, but I bet your ass I can run a faster 50K than I ever could. So you transition your goals and you focus on the other races. So I don't know where my story is going to go. I'd like it to go where I'm a multi-time podium placement in U.S. National Series, and I still have a belief that can happen. But I think it's more staying focused through the low patches than it is through the high, right? So that's what I think about when I think about my story. My story might not be the guy who ever has the most beautiful stride and runs 70 miles a week and makes it look effortless, but my story can be this guy still stuck around even though his situation hasn't been perfect, and he's done well enough to warrant some attention, right? He's doing something right. And so that's the storyline I'm sticking to for now. And I think about that a lot. I believe this. I wholeheartedly believe that if I went and trained for the 1,500 meters again right now, I know this, I don't see myself running as fast as I did in college, even if I put 3 years into it right now. But I know that you get out to the 5K distance and further, And I believe in my heart of hearts, like if I trained for the 5K, I could run it, I bet you, as fast as I did in college if that was my sole focus right now. And you're not, I mean, what'd you run? Did you run like 14:59 or something stupid?
Well, I did PR on my 5K last year.
Exactly, at 34 years old.
Right.
So as soon as you get away from those short, spicy distances, like our potential to stay good is so far extended beyond what people think. You have marathon Olympic hopefuls that are 45 years old. Hopefuls. On the women's side, I think we've had 45-year-old marathoners in the Olympics. That's a decade away. And our sport is comparable to a marathoner. If you want to go focus on beast races in your mid-40s, you could still be the best beast racer you've ever been in your 40s. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but that's the shit I tell myself.
I was just going to say, I was going to ask, like, okay, like, yes, and this is where it comes back to the story, right? It's like, okay, maybe, like, that this is my story, right? That I can be this person who, like, put it all together in their mid-30s and, like, continue to crush for a decade fast. And, like, you know, when we were in, like, our early 20s or in our teens, you see, like, that guy who's 40 at a road race and he's, like, running, like, under 16. You're like, damn, that's crazy. That old guy is out there crushing. But, like, so, like, maybe that could be, like, I tell myself that. It's like, okay, like, where could we actually, like, what could I do? Where's the end of my story? Like, it's not the college runner that I was, not the high school runner that I was. It's not like this my middling 20s that never really came to fruition. Like, maybe maybe I am that later athlete that is continuing to kind of push those boundaries. What would you tell somebody that's kind of like do you, like, when you do tell yourself, is it just that, like, hey, there's other examples of this, or, like, how are you kind of keeping it going?
Well, I guess, like you said, you look to me because I'm a few years older and you're 1 year less progressed in the sport because I think you started a year after I did. Yeah, you just look to the next guys, and the next crop of guys would be like a Woodsy. Killian's a year older. But, like, you think beyond that. Like, you think about, like, a Matt Novakovic who's, I don't know, 45 now maybe or so. I don't know if we've seen anybody past 42 or so in our sport who comes out and is a consistent podium top 10 contender in U.S. National Series. I don't believe we've had anybody that I know of. I'm sure somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. But, like, I'm starting to think ahead as my 38th is coming along. And thinking, like, you know, I can't wait till I'm 45 and still being, like, somebody who then that's, like, a talking point, being, like, setting the example. So I'd rather run 3 days a week and stay healthy for the next 8 years than try to be a hero and be screwed. So that's part of my thought process as well, I guess.
To go back and tell your younger self something about training or racing, what do you think you would kind of tell yourself?
I'm going to steal somebody else's things, and that's my co-host Bracken. Bracken's a bit younger than me, but I do think at times he's a bit wiser. And his saying, you know, he's a family man. I haven't had to be tied down with any obligations other than myself. So he's had to mature a little quicker, I think. Yeah. But it's the pay now or pay later, like, principle. It's literally that simple statement. And I steal that from him, and I have no problem stealing from him. But pay now or pay later. And I wish I would have told myself dozens of times in the past when something was kind of bothering me, but I just had to run because I had something coming up. And I didn't pay now by taking time off. I chose to run through something, and then I paid later by taking 2 to 4 months off of working out. It would have been much better to pay now. You know, when you pay later, there's interest, and it hurts more, and that's not how it goes. And so that's the one thing I would go back and tell myself. I'd literally put that on my wall, pay now or pay later, and in subscript underneath it would say, always pay now. That would be it. That would literally be everything. And I bet you I would have taken half the injuries. I would have probably been better fitness overall, and I wouldn't have had to learn all those hard lessons along the way. So that would be the one thing I would.
The running public, I've been blown away with the impact you guys are having with the cultural impact you guys are having, like OCR. Like, the connection you guys have been able to make with people has been amazing. And we mentioned the Burpee 10K real quick, which is in July, and this is where it really connected to me that, like, what you guys was doing was really special, and, like, the words that you are speaking, like, really mean a lot to people. Yeah. Like, I've found out other ways since then, but this one, like, you guys essentially were speculating on what a good time would be for that race, right? Like, no one knew. It wasn't like a race that like ever happened. And like, so when Mark Gaudette and I went under the times you guys speculated, people went crazy. People were like, oh my God, how'd you do that? I was like, how do you know what's a good time on this? This is a made up event. This doesn't even exist. But it's just like that you guys like that the trust that you guys have had in like and have been able to instill in people because of the good knowledge that you put out there and the good faith that you put out there has gone a long way. So like,
yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, for sure. And like, thank you guys for doing what you're doing. So like, what do you think you guys are doing that's like resonating so well with the people in obstacle course racing?
Nobody's asked me that question, Rich.
Have you thought about it?
All I know is that thanks for asking, by the way. All I know is like Bracken was my coach. My co-host Bracken was my coach. And then he realized I didn't really need him anymore. And he said, hey, I don't think you need to pay me to coach you. I think you get this all. Maybe we just catch up once in a while on the phone, or if you have questions, run them by me. And then we started chatting, and then we started chatting about one question I'd have, and then it turned into an hour-long phone conversation. We like really like talked each other through a lot of things. Like even as people in the know, we talked each other through a lot of things. Suddenly Bracken's calling me for advice, and I used to be paying him, 6 months earlier to be my coach, and now my former coach is calling me to bounce things off of it. It was just an interesting dynamic. And we realized we were just super helpful for each other, like in general, to have in each other's back pocket. And then we said we should maybe record some of this stuff some days. It's so helpful for us that maybe it'd be helpful for other people too. And that's like where it started, to be honest with you. And so he had to break ties with Obstacle Dominator, which was like took a little bit of time and whatever. But I think that's it. I think like we don't intend to, like our intent is to help people, but I don't think we have like an agenda or even a plan behind it. It's more like what would help us talk through for ourselves, and then we talk through it for ourselves and allow an audience to be a part of it. Does that make sense?
It does. And this is...
So then you just get an insight into the brain of maybe somebody who's, I'm not going to say we're overly accomplished, but like into the brain of someone who performs at a somewhat high level. And I think it's just allowing people to get into our mind and allowing how we work things out to be heard like on a weekly basis. That's the best I can come up with.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of my favorite blogs, which I visit sometimes, it's this blog called Wait But Why.
Okay.
This dude named Tim Urban, and when he started it, he just said I just wrote something like how I would want to read, and like it's a very interesting way that he kind of puts it out there. But it kind of sounds the same thing. It's like, hey, this is helpful, right? Like if we think this is good, there's enough people out in this world that there's got to be somebody who's like picking up this information and it's going to be helpful for them as well. Do you feel like that's kind of like along the same lines?
That's exactly it. Like if you think something's helpful, then probably most everybody else will think something's helpful. And it's just Bracken and I talking about things we already somewhat know, but then diving into them further and chatting them out deeper. And then, I mean, Bracken just said in an episode a little while back that he's learned more since we started this podcast, and he's progressed at a rate with his knowledge, and it's only because all we're doing is like sorting through our own problems in a sense, like on a recorded regular basis. And
I feel that same way in terms of this podcast is like the learning styles, like my learning style, I need to either write or speak. Like if I listen or I'm taught, or like if I'm talked at, or if I'm like having to read, I don't read that well. Like I don't learn things that way.
The same way.
Yeah, but then there's a lot of people who are taking audio in, right? So like they're the ones that are really kind of reaping that.
How long have you been? Because you started before us. You got to be going on over about 2 years now, huh?
Just about. I think it started in April of 2019. I think.
So you're 2 years.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah. Thank you,
dude. All I know is when Matt B. Davis, when we started the podcast, Matt B. Davis. Matt B. Davis can be a prick sometimes, intentionally. Not unintentionally. He's intentionally just a dick. And be like, heard you're starting a podcast, good luck. I was like, my whole bank account says you don't make it a year. That's part of the reason we kept doing that, because Matt B. Davis sent one stupid asshole message, and he meant it, to be honest. But when I realized, like, podcasting will be easy, like, nobody gives you, to do this on your own as a solo, especially, like, and you were coming out with 2 episodes a week for a while, and maybe you still are sometimes.
Like, with the torque stuff.
Nobody understands, like, the complexities of getting guests, scheduling guests, editing content, finding stuff that people still want to hear about, making the same topic spun in a new way so we can make another episode out of it, so somehow we can get more good content out without it seeming like the same old talk about threshold running. Like it's like and then keeping up with it all is like it's a tough endeavor, man. So
shouts to